Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Miscellaneous Gab, and today we're going to go over the Lexington Letter. The Lexington Letter is a companion ebook of about 50 to 60 pages that was released around the time of season 1. However, if we look back at it with fresh eyes, we can learn a lot more about Lumon, what it's up to, and the dynamics between the Innie and the Outie. So buckle up, grab some Christmas mints, grab a snack, get somewhere comfy, and I'm going to explain it all to you. The Lexington Letter begins with a correspondence between two reporters with the Topeka Star. Topeka is obviously a city in Kansas. Oddly enough, there is a town in Kansas called Severance, Kansas. As we learned from episode 1, Severance is all over the place. Now, so one reporter attaches a letter from a woman named Peg Kincaid. She talks to her editor, Jim, and says, I was forwarded this letter and it's really interesting. I think there's something there. Will you take a look? The letter is written on behalf of both the woman Peg Kincaid as well as Peggy K, her Innie. She's writing this letter because she's afraid to go to the police because of how connected Lumon is. She even mentions that she's staying in a motel because she thinks someone is watching her. She thinks a black car is following her, and it seems like someone went through her mail. Now we see similarities between her and Petey with this need to communicate what they know and have it be in somebody else's hands in case something happens to them. We open with a little bit about Peggy's life in the letter. We learn she was a bus driver and that because she was on the younger end at 50 years old, they used to call her baby driver because of the movie. Now this can give us a hint to what time period we're in. I know the cars feel so old and dated, but then they're talking on cell phones and using advanced technology. Baby Driver came out in 2017, so we know it takes place at least after that. During her work as a bus driver, she started to feel burnt out. One day she skidded off the road on black ice. As I was reading this, I'm like, why are there so many car crash related occurrences, which we'll get into at the end of this letter. Just tuck that away for now. She was obviously let go, even though no kids died, and she waited in the ditch with the bus, but she was let go. She was feeling burnt out anyway, but then she hears an ad on the radio about a job, an employment opportunity that was pretty vague. She did recognize the name Lumon because she remembers using their deodorant brand as a little girl. She didn't think that she would get the job because she didn't have qualifications, but as we know, the only qualification you really need to work at Lumon is a working brain that is working in some capacity. What she learned is that she would have no memory of the work that she was doing, but she would still receive 4 times the pay. She gets the job, she does the severance procedure, which she agrees is painless, and then she starts working as a severed employee in the MDR department. Here's how she described her day. She would swipe her badge, change clothes into Lumon neutrals, which could have no labels, no brands, no writing, etc. That's something we don't see our Lumon people do, is change their clothes. They just come into the office with the proper clothes on and then enter the elevator to the severed floor. She recalls about her Innie, she was me, but not me. This went on for 2 years and then it all changed. One Tuesday, she got off work and as she was pulling on her jacket, she felt something in her pants pocket. Then she goes into the backstory of this language called Puglish, which she invented with her sister as she was a young girl. So her and her sister had invented this language, which included a symbol for each letter. So it's a kind of a pictorial language, but it has meaning to her. So it seems like the Innie was able to learn about this language, things leaking over, almost like the paint and the hallway leaked over into Irving's mind. Now, we don't know if this was an earlier version of Severance where some of the kinks were not totally ironed out. Here's what the note said. Dear Peggy K, I don't know what this language is or why it's in my head. It's been coming to me slowly over the past weeks. I find myself writing it at my desk. I thought if anyone would know what it was, maybe it would be you. I don't know if this will even pass the code detectors, but I feel I had to try. I know this is a breach in protocol. Please don't be angry with me. If you cannot tell, I am your Innie. I live down here in the macro data refining department with my 3 coworkers. I have often thought of you and what your life might be like out there, why I exist in the first place. Why does one choose to get severed? Maybe this language isn't real and I'm writing nonsense, but if you read this, I would love for you to write me back. I understand if that is not possible. I do not mean any harm. Sincerely, your Innie. She mentions that the code detectors are a quote new technology. So I don't know if there's still a new technology in Mark's time or what, but evidently they can't catch everything. Now this can give us some hints as to why maybe PD was able to get through the code sensors or others were able to sneak things in and out of Lumon. We know that they're not completely foolproof. Now the two start writing back to each other. Peg, mentions that someday she'd come out of the elevator feeling giddy, wound up, or even scared. She wonders, what were they doing down there with my body? As we are starting to really solidify in season 2, the numbers represent feelings that can be associated with woe, malice, dread, and frolic. And it seems like they have a staying power beyond just the moment that she's sorting the numbers, that her outie is actually feeling these things as she's coming out of the elevator for the day. Okay, you guys, just a quick note as I'm editing this video. It's very interesting to me. Peg's outie is feeling things that either Peg's innie is feeling or the data she's refining. If we are of the theory that the innies are somehow kind of refining and balancing the tempers in themselves. When we see outie Mark is depressed and sad. He's crying in his car, but his innie doesn't feel that. Like his innie wipes the tears like, oh, what's going on? His innie's happy. So clearly the feelings that the outies are feeling don't necessarily transfer into the innies, but it seems like whatever the innies are feeling, or maybe what the numbers are causing them to feel, or what they're programming within the numbers is transferable into the outie, but not necessarily the other way around. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to point that out. Let me know what you think. She asks what her innie does, writes back. The innie says, the best I've come up with is that the numbers make you feel things. It's not an individual number, but a whole cluster of them. And after a while, they'll sort of throb a certain emotion in you. Sometimes it's joy or sadness or worry. Sometimes it's obvious, other times more subtle. Each type of number has its own designation, like the angry ones are called MA, malice. Once you've identified the numbers, you surround them with the arrow on your computer and into a bin they go. She goes on further to talk about the incentives. Even outie Peggy says, I hope they have different syrups with the waffles. The innie seems super curious about life on the inside, like what it feels like to be drunk or even asleep. The outie starts to get super curious about her innie. She mentions she knows movies exist, but doesn't know references to certain actors. They wrote back and forth for 3 to 4 weeks, and outie Peg feels like she's found a friend. It's almost like a crush, like outie Peg paints her nails pink one week to see what her innie would think. Her innie said she was almost moved to tears because the nail polish was so beautiful. The innie then writes, the head of security, Mr. Dooler, described as a pale little man with a terrifying smile, seemed to be watching her more closely. He said that he would watch her standing at the far end of the hall, just smiling and standing there. I read this a couple years ago, but I reread this right before bed, and let me tell you, it was freaking creepy. She said that she thought he wanted to play with her a little before dragging her to the break room. Outie Peg asks what the break room is, and her innie won't answer. It's so crazy that the innies have such a visceral reaction to the break room. Like even PD says there's this room, and then he can't describe it. He's so haunted by the break room that he has to play Mark a tape instead of being like, here's the break room, here's what happens. It almost feels like a supernatural occurrence that they can't quite describe. One day, on November 3rd, outie Peg finds a note from innie Peggy, who is excited because she finished her file called Lexington. She said she could barely wait to go home to tell her outie about it, even if it meant cutting the melon bar party short. She finished it at 2:30 p.m. and mentions that in her note. Lexington had evidently been an extra complicated file, and outie Peg even thinks like, I have been feeling exhausted lately, but on the day she finishes this file, she felt so giddy that she wanted to go for a run. Outie Peg sees the news later. She reports that a truck had been blown up at 2:32 p.m. It was a Dorner Therapeutics truck, which is definitely a competitor of Lumon. The company, Dorner Therapeutics, claimed some sort of corporate espionage, like their devices had been destroyed or hacked into or stopped working. It was super weird. People were injured and people died during this truck explosion. Right away, the outie gets this super creepy feeling like this happened. This can't be a coincidence. I feel like my innie had something to do with this. She writes back and tells her innie to stop working. She explains her theory on the Lexington file and the truck blowing up. She doesn't hear back for like 2 weeks. And she really starts to worry about her Innie. One day, she emerges from the elevator with wet hair to find a note on her car that said it was a mishap from the water cooler. Now, we know Lumon lies to the employees about them getting hurt or injured on the job. She got like a gift card for a burrito, similar to Mark getting a gift card at Pip's Diner. Now, immediately when you think wet hair, you think waterboarding or some sort of torture, which is so effed up and creepy. 2 weeks later, she gets a note from her Innie in English. It says, "Duly found your last note. Been in break room. Don't know how long. Think you're right about Lexington. Lumon updating code detectors, but they're down today. Hope this booklet gives clarity. Be careful. I love you." This has the MDR orientation handbook in it. And right away, of course, Outie Peggy getting a note in English. So we know the code detectors are taken down for maintenance. They're updated. Maybe they updated them to be more sensitive to testing for pictorial marks as well, because clearly Dooley found this and was probably torturing the Innie to get the translation out of her in Publish. And what's so sad is that if he kept her in the break room for 2 weeks, that means she probably didn't say what it meant, which is so sad. So she writes, "Are you okay?" in English, and then comes back up 10 minutes later feeling a note in her mouth. So as she goes down into the elevator at her normal time, comes up 10 minutes later, similar to how Mark came up about 10-15 minutes after his shift started once he gets fired by Milchick. The note says, "Peg, leave now, get somewhere else. They will try to follow. Nothing they say is real. Distribute the training booklet. Answers are there if you look. Thank you for my life. You are the best part of it. I'll be with you always." That is so sad. The Outie definitely does say that it's been about 2 weeks. Timing doesn't add up here. So another quick editing note, I'm realizing that the timeline of this entire letter is completely fucked. So remember how she says that the Dorner Therapeutics truck happened on Friday, November 3rd? Yes, she's writing this email to the reporter on Saturday, November 10th, so 8 days later. However, she said that after that November 3rd crash, the next day, which we can assume, actually not even the next day, because if that happened on a Friday, then she wrote back on a Monday, which was the 6th, saying, "Hey, stop all of your work. I think this is related to the truck crash." Then she says she doesn't hear back from her Innie for 2 weeks, which would make no sense, because if she sent that letter down there on about the 5th, 2 weeks didn't pass because she was writing this reporter an email on the 10th. And then she says after 2 weeks, she hears back that note in English that says the code detectors were not working. In the letter, she says that she doesn't write back for a full week. So there's about 2.5 weeks of missing time here, unaccounted for time. I can't explain this other than just, this is a hint that timing in the Severance world does not work properly. How else can you account for all this missing time? Peg says that she was so freaked out about this, she didn't know what to do. She considered posting on social media. So there's another hint to like what kind of world we live in. She mentions Facebook. So we do have social media. We do have Baby Driver in this world. Her editor, Jim, responds and says, "Don't report this. Like this just sounds like a disgruntled employee. And plus, we don't want to get in trouble with, like, it's not worth going against Lumon." 3 hours later, another email pops up which says that Margaret died in a car accident on November 11th. Car accident, another car accident. Peg dies in a car accident just 1 day after she had been told to run away. Jim attaches this news and says that maybe it's for the best because he didn't want to risk a libel suit with Lumon. He brings up an issue in Nashville, which was another expose on Lumon. They thought it was a well-sourced expose on feeding tubes. Feeding tubes, just like the one Miss Cobell has. Then he signs his name, and his name is Jim Milchick. We have seen correspondence between Jim and the reporter, but it had never been signed Jim Milchick until the end. Peg was scared to go to the police because she does think that Lumon has their little claws in the police. It really feels like they own the town. They own politicians, they own reporters. Perhaps Milchick is a Lumon family. Even Jim Milchick is somehow connected with Lumon and they've bought him. Maybe he's Seth's brother. Maybe he's Seth's father. I don't know.
Do it, Seth!
Then we get into the handbook. There is like a weird little brain chip dildo looking dude talks about what severance means. Quote, a refiner is someone who makes something pure, more usable, and more accessible. So this is like the standard dictionary definition of a refiner, like if you're refining ore, but I feel like it has a particular meaning here when it comes to data and what they're refining, sorting it, making it pure, balancing the tempers. Remember that Keir Egan said that I have identified components, which I call tempers, which are just derived from every human soul: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. Each man's character is defined by the precise ratio that resides in him. I walked into the cave of my own mind, and there I tamed them. Should you tame the tempers as I did mine, then the world shall become but your appendage. It is this great and consecrated power that I hope to pass on to all of you, my children. So there's this thought that if you have the tempers balanced, that you have some sort of power. Now, we don't know what this power is. This power might be bringing people back from the dead. It might give you the ability to hack into technology. Clearly, there's a connection between the data that she's refining in the file, making pure, making more usable and accessible, right? That's what the quote in the handbook is. You're making this data more pure, usable, and accessible. Is this somehow code or an intro to break into these devices, sabotage the devices of Dorner Therapeutics? There's so many crashes being mentioned in this letter alone. She crashes her bus on the ice, then she's kind of desperate, out of a job, the perfect kind of candidate that Lumon is looking for. The truck crash, and then a crash kills her. So it just makes you wonder, like Gemma's car crash, all these crashes. I do think Cold Harbor is a way of bringing Gemma back by balancing the data, by balancing the tempers. But what are all the other Innies working on? We know Mark's been working on multiple files during his time at Lumon. PD says, what if you're down there murdering people for 8 hours a day? Even though PD doesn't know what they're doing, he still senses that it has devastating consequences. The handbook also says at Lumon, they remove impurities from data and reorganize it in its purest form. They say knowing the true meaning behind the numbers could inhibit your natural intuition. There's 5 bins and 4 number clusters. 4 number clusters representing woe, frolic, dread, and malice, and 5 bins potentially representing the different 5 brainwaves. So maybe they're hacking into the minds of people, maybe they're hacking into the minds of computers or devices. There's also a section about inter-department fraternization that is discouraged because of, quote, spreading disease. We know why this is. They want to keep them away. They don't want that crossover. They don't want strength in numbers. The Lexington Letter is so fascinating. I feel so horrified and sad for Peg, who was just done away with. Now you have to wonder, was her crash in the car orchestrated by another Innie? Who knows? Or maybe they just cut her brakes or something. It definitely seems like Lumon utilizes car crashes to do away with their opponents or people who are causing them some sort of inconvenience. I believe there's an evolution. Maybe it started with hacking into devices, computer systems, phones in order to sabotage and change them. And then maybe now they're refining the neural pathways in a dead person's mind. That's kind of the next evolution, Gemma. But I kind of wonder if the twins that we saw in episode 4 are a hint of what's to come. Perhaps the Innies refine themselves to make themselves the most purest, obedient, balanced form. This also got me thinking that what if Milchick and Natalie were former severed employees who ended up being able to refine themselves into this kind of perfect, weird, robotic person that is now able to exist as that weird altered version on the inside and outside. It's almost like if that's true and the Innies are refining themselves or refining people, they're almost doing a version of reintegration, but in the like clone Egan weird cult form. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. There's so much to this Lexington Letter. Honestly, it won't take you long to read if you like to read it yourself, but just don't read it before bed because it's very creepy and scary and sad. Anyway, please like this video, subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you want me to do another midweek check-in with your theories, my theories, all the crazy things that came out of episode 4, and I will see you very soon. Stay safe out there. Don't get severed. Bye.